We have some council members here, and we have most of the community board chairs. And I want to take that time to really go through this next exercise, which is extremely important, which is my comprehensive planning work. The comprehensive plan is going to be something that will be very controversial, and I think it's important that we in the borough board get first dibs. They're the first group of people we're presenting this to. You're the first eyes that will see what we're trying to do with this comprehensive plan. Some of you guys might not even know what that is. You're going to find out today. And I'm grateful and happy to present to you Mr. John Douglas, who is the head of land use in the Brooklyn Borough Hall office. Thank you so much. Please take it away, John.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President. Like he said, I'm the Director of Land Use for the Borough President, and I'm very excited to be here and finally put some faces to names. I've seen Carol Ann has been doing a lot of work with you all, so I know she's really excited about working with you all. And it's my pleasure to present some of this to you. Like the Borough President said, we wanted to put the concept that he sort of been working with us on to get this planning effort off the ground. Since the Borough President took office, he's been very supportive of the work, and he's pulled a project team together with us, with the Regional Planning Association, the New York Academy of Medicine, to help us sort of think through some of these issues. So we're calling is Planning for Public Health in Brooklyn. I'm sure we'll find a more creative name once our communications teams gets to it. So you can go to the next slide. Just overview what we're doing. So introductions, remarks the borough just gave. I'll give you a little bit of an overview. We'll identify some of the things we'd just like the borough board to take a look at, and just how we would like you to engage at this time. Just a brief overview of the timeline, and then we can discuss. Next slide. So planning and public health, I think we all know that public health has been front and center in our lives due to COVID, and we all have health issues that we all have to go through. It's something I think all humans do, and over time we've seen a growing body of evidence that shows that affordable housing, quality public transit, access to amenities and opportunities for jobs and other economic activities, all are basically social determinants of health, or these are factors that can affect the physical and mental health of our population. So next slide. This is just a slide showing about, I think urban planning and the public health profession began together to try to solve some of these very similar issues related to reducing the spread of infectious disease, safe housing, making sure that we have separate zones for heavy industrial uses that could affect our health. These are all sort of the foundations of what planning was about. And over time, it sort of diverged, and public health had its own field, and then planning sort of went more towards an architectural, physical built form, more focus on those issues rather than the public health. So next slide. And just to talk a little bit about how the city plans and some of the issues that I think we all can, or at least some of us might find compelling, is that the current planning paradigm, how we talk about planning, especially about growth of housing, is typically measured in ways that doesn't necessarily connect with the real experience that people live. So let's say we want to build 100,000 units of affordable housing. That's a great number, but it doesn't really necessarily show the benefits of what that housing can produce. And I think it's important to remind ourselves what we're building affordable housing for. And when we focus on things that are sort of abstract goals, like a random number of housing units, it's hard for the public to understand what we're actually trying to achieve. And then they start, it's a logical leap to ask who's benefiting from this rather than taking the value of the product at face value. So next slide. So what I think the borough president has encouraged us to do, and I think other, planning nonprofits and think tanks and groups have been thinking about, is that we need to articulate a set of values and metrics that respond to that are shared at some level, that we have a vision of what we want for our future community, at a values level, not necessarily a number of unit count, but certainly that we share certain values that we can come together to develop goals, objectives, and then how we implement that strategy. So next slide. So like I said, for example, instead of talking about affordable housing, like we're going to build 100,000 units and it's going to be wonderful, talk about the values that or the benefits that affordable housing provides. Affordable housing lower your family's housing costs, so you can afford other things like prescription drugs or food. Two really important things that most people live with, and highlighting that affordable housing is really the key to getting one key pillar of making sure that living in New York is affordable, is to get more affordable housing. New affordable clean housing also can help reduce exposure to mold or pests that can aggravate existing asthma in people and other negative health outcomes. And also producing affordable housing in areas that are close to transit, close to jobs, allows people to have more access and more opportunity to get a better paying job. Let's spend less money on commuting, not having to drive so far to work or take such a long commute to get to work. So the location of the affordable housing is also critical. Next slide. So we know that there are this nexus of planning, public health and planning, our social and physical environments, are sort of common themes that we think about. Just to put it to the ground, we talk about education, employment, transit, affordable housing. And so we look at how we plan our physical environment so that we can ensure that whatever we're doing in terms of construction or policy is looking at ways to improve our public health outcomes and public health, and the health of our neighbors. Next slide. So the borough president has, supported and is leading this effort on comprehensive planning, and it's been an exciting ride with him. He's focused primarily on making sure that we are looking at public health indicators as a metric for success, and that improving public health outcomes like lower obesity rates or asthma, or chronic diseases, that those are some of the those metrics of success rather than arbitrary numbers. Want to improve the physical health of all Brooklynites, and make sure that it's data driven, using professionals from public health, urban planning, to art, the whole gambit of to help inform our community engagement strategy, our community engagement work, and to inform on the collection of existing conditions data. So showing what's going on the ground, where are our parks, where are our schools, where are the issue areas that we have, and then looking at recommendations for the future of Brooklyn. Next slide. So just to put I think we all have talked about COVID, and understand the issues around COVID, but life expectancy dropped significantly across the country, but the discrepancy in life expectancy and the rate of death of COVID was disproportionate spatially, as you can see. Coney Island, East New York, or Gateway, and other parts of Flatbush, Brownsville, Crown Heights, all sort of had a much higher death rate from COVID than other areas of the borough. And those areas are primarily made up of our low income and or communities of color. So next slide. And this is just slides showing that, the Brooklyn, as you can see, there's a death rate, so the number of people who died of COVID per 100,000 people. And then there's a circle in red that shows, or the red square here is identifying that, as you can see, the Hispanic rate of death was much higher at 537 compared to Asian at 303 or white at 397. Same thing for Black. They had a much higher rate of death from those who actually got COVID. So we know there's an unequal outcome, and we're trying to look at solutions that help to rectify that. So next slide. And as you can see here, another sort of metric, not just COVID, but looking at the disparity in health outcomes related to birthing. The borough president has been, taking a leadership role in this and highlighting that, the average discrepancy between the outcomes of a negative outcome for a Black mother or a white mother is about 9 times higher for a Black woman to have some sort of pregnancy-related mortality, so themselves, a child, or both. So that's also another issue that we felt, highlights an unequal outcome or an unequal situation on the ground that we want to help rectify. Next slide. So the gathering research, just overview, we're going to use data-driven, we're going to use data to drive how we look at this problem and how we develop strategies for recommendations and implementing those recommendations. So just one example is that, the higher the tree density, we've shown that there's a lower incident of asthma when you control for all of the other factors. So it's one example of how urban planning, increasing the tree canopy, planting more trees in areas that have less trees can help reduce our asthma rates in young people. That's an important, issue to address, and we can, in the planning field, help rectify it. And talking about it in those terms, I think, may connect more with our friends and neighbors. So next slide. Same thing here, we see a higher tree density shows most people that live closer to trees are going to report having a much better day or excellent health compared to those that are that don't have a high, have a forest or have a well-defined big tree canopy on their street trees. So it's just another thing, another peer-reviewed sort of data-driven analysis that shows that controlling for all other factors, planting those trees, adding more canopy can help our mental health as well. So next slide. So in terms of a comprehensive plan, I think the borough president wanted us to focus on public health because it's such an important issue that is so important to the recent experience we've all been through with COVID. But not to say that this planning effort is only going to be a public health. We have the Regional Planning Association who's been collecting a lot of data for us over the last week, that's 8 or 9 months actually. So this is like some of the issues or some of the areas for the existing conditions that will be included. So we'll have, land use map, we'll have like the demographics of the borough and looking at flooding and looking at, where our immigrant populations are, where our transit networks are, where our capital projects are, where the most income, rent burden populations are. We're going to have a whole look at all array of issues, not just public health. But we are going to specifically, we think it's important to highlight the spatial discrepancies that and racial and income discrepancies that we are finding in some of the health data that we found. So next slide. If you look here, this is a map on the left of the borough of Brooklyn. You can see the darker the color brown, the higher the percentage of families that are living in poverty. And if you look on the right, you can see a dot density map is what we call it. It's basically like for every one dot, that's 200 people that live in your community board. And then the colors of dots are by race. So every one dot one green dot equals 100 Black people, one white dot equals 100 Black people. So it just shows showing the racial makeup by borough. And as you can see, we have a high concentration on the right, 17, 16, 9, 8, 3, primarily in 4 and 5 of Black and Latino. And you can also see that that's an area of high poverty. We also see that in parts of Sunset Park as well, in Borough Park. The next slide. As well as Coney Island, of course. And then, looking here, we saw asthma rates as really striking. The New York Academy of Medicine and RPA worked really hard to sift through the CDC data to pull out the most important public health factors to highlight. And as you can see here, the higher the color on the left, sorry, the darker the color on the left map, the higher the rate of hospitalizations for asthma per person. So the the people in purple are basically going to be going to the hospital for asthma on a higher rate than the people in the lighter colors. And as you can see, the darker color aligns very closely with our Black and brown communities. So next slide. We're also seeing this on issues related to heat stress. This is a heat vulnerability map on the left, which includes a bunch of factors, but it shows the populations that are basically most sensitive to when it gets very hot, including older people, people with chronic illnesses, young people, children, pregnant women, and then low-income people and people with less access to healthcare. So we see the same sort of pattern developing where we have low income and people of color facing the hardest impacts of heat stress, which is clearly exacerbated by a low tree cover and also rising height, rising temperatures. Next slide. And then here on the left, we kind of, it's sort of it's an important existing conditions that shows median household income in the background. So the darker the color on the map, the higher the income for that community. And then the yellow dots and the red dots show, yellow dots is new affordable housing construction over the last 10 years or 8-7 years. And then the red dots show us units that were preserved through, some sort of HPD preservation strategy. So they'll finance, they'll reduce their tax abatement as long as they provide affordable housing for a very long period. So that's the red dots. And as you can see, those red and yellow dots are really concentrated primarily in Bed-Stuy, Brownsville, East New York, Bushwick, and of course, downtown Brooklyn and Williamsburg, Greenpoint. And we think it's an important, the borough president, I think it's important, as we said, highlighted in the beginning, affordable housing construction is going to be good for these communities. It's going to provide that opportunity for reducing monthly rental costs, improving public health, hopefully provide access to jobs. But we know this is a regional problem. We know this is an issue about housing affordability that, basically the whole country at this point. And where we see that the communities that are most affected are doing their part to help expand the affordable housing stock. Our friends in the South, we have less new construction that's for, affordable housing. And we think there's opportunities for the rest of the borough to contribute some additional affordable housing stock that helps improve our health outcomes for our neighbors. So next slide. So in terms of recommendations, I think, we sort of highlighted some of the existing conditions that we're looking at, and clearly RPA and NIAM will walk through, once we have the existing conditions report, there'll be a much more extensive list of maps, data, and explanation of just, an update of what's going on in the borough, what the challenges are. But as it comes into recommendations, we're going to be, the borough president is very, very sensitive to making sure that our community engagement strategy is holistic and make sure that we reach people that maybe don't necessarily always come to regular land use meetings, that may also have a benefit and have something to gain from affordable housing development. I think the borough president basically put out his transition team's report, which pretty much put out a roadmap for next steps in administration, but we think that there's some recommendations in there. I think some of these people in this room probably worked on this, but that there's recommendations that came out of that transition report, and some of those things may be included. We can see them being included, like something to do with reducing parking minimums to ensure that we can get more affordable housing, making sure that there's cease and desist zones so that you don't get uh, harassed to sell your home, or and then the borough president, will is identified that this is an important document and process to help inform his future ULURP recommendations. So through this engagement process, through this data-driven process, we hope that to give the borough president a nice set of existing conditions and recommendations for him to use as a lens to evaluate future ULURP items or other projects that come across his desk. And recommendations, since the borough is so big, clearly you all are the most local experts. You know your communities very well. The recommendations we foresee will likely be more like a neighborhood topology strategy rather than a site or neighborhood specific. So if you live close to transit and you live, like a subway station, and you have, a bunch of resources, you might be asked, the recommendations that come out might be to, have some higher density development around that transit node. If you're a community that lives a little bit further from transit, more car oriented, there may be strategies the recommendations may differ a bit. They may not differ completely, but an example may be, rather than developing a 20-story tower in the middle of flatlands, you might build a large tower next to the subway, but in the rest of the borough, maybe like a gentle density, trying to get a few, like an accessory dwelling unit, or some just less high density development, more opportunities to, utilize large sites for more than just one unit. So next slide. So what do we want for the borough board? The borough president has asked us to make sure that, like he said, you're the first stop on our tour. So though RPA and NIAM are working on developing the existing conditions report. Once we have that finalized, we'll circulate it to the borough board members. We would love to have your feedback, make sure that what we're collecting, how we are looking at some of these issues resonates with you. If we're missing data pieces, we really want to hear from you and understand. We're not in the recommendation setting yet. We're really just in the, let's make sure we have a complete picture of our communities, and then move on to a more deeper community engagement strategy on what the future of each community looks like. And then also we would love to have your help in spreading the word about the effort and making sure that as we have public meetings, public engagement opportunities, that you all can help us spread the word and make sure that we're reaching all of the people that are the most important people to touch on issues like this. Next slide. And this is just a very quick overview with timeline. So we hope to get into serious community engagement strategy this fall, September, October. And most of them getting feedback on the existing conditions for this fall, and then in the winter we'll move on to getting that deep sort of community engagement around the recommendations for the report. So next slide. That's it. So I hope it didn't take too long, and happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Before we answer any questions, I just wanted to thank John for the great presentation, and really excited about the direction that we're going in to make this happen. And I guess the crux of it, can we go back to the presentation very quickly? I think it's important. And I want to go to the second, I think it's the fourth to last slide. Oh, keep going, keep going. Keep going. There, that one. So this is the foundation of the problem that we believe exists when it comes to development in communities, is that there is a small portion of Brooklyn that has been charged with the development of affordable housing almost exclusively. And what you're seeing here in yellow, mostly in yellow and red, is where the housing development has happened in our city, in our borough. We are in a hole when it comes to the amount of housing that should exist in a growing city. We have the lowest housing development in our time since the Great Depression. And in doing so has really made it more difficult for us to find homes, compete and using the market to compete for lower rents and so forth because of the lack of housing stock. Now, there's a lot of theories and a lot of work that we could talk about on whether or not housing development itself is the cause of the crisis that we have at this moment. And that's not necessarily the one that we're going to argue. But what we are going to argue is that when we do build affordable housing or we build housing, it happens almost exclusively in the same neighborhoods. And it's those same neighborhoods that tend to have the weakest health outcomes, the weakest transit outcomes, the weakest birth and mortality rate, the lowest education, the lowest park space, all those variables. So what we're saying is we're going to produce or work through this comprehensive plan so that everyone can contribute and that you guys and your communities get an opportunity to have some level of self-determination. You know your districts better than we do. No one wants to come into your district and say, this is where you should build housing. What we're saying is that these are the factors and the determinants as to where we feel housing can be developed. We feel like this transit hub, for example, can do with a little more housing than not. And then we want you to kind of tell us where you think those things can happen. And what we end up seeing is that there's yellow all over Brooklyn and there's red all over Brooklyn. Not this area here where neighborhoods have gone untouched for decades, in some cases centuries. So what we have are 1 second here. What we have is information from RPA, the Regional Planning Association, from the American help me out here. I want to get it right, John.
New York Academy of Medicine.
The New York Academy of Medicine. We're working on a contract with a local organizing group so that we can do on the ground work in surveys and getting information about what people want or what people expect. So this is like real data that you will be receiving on a day-by-day basis. But we're going to ask community boards to be a part of the solution to development and not continue to work through like this NIMBY loophole that we're in. And I want to be clear that the NIMBYism that we've been experiencing in Brooklyn comes from a myriad of reasons, I guess. And I get it. It's been very difficult out here. The ULURP process sucks. The ULURP process is no good. And it's the ULURP process that has put us in the position we're in. This is supposed to be my alternative to the ULURP process. Once I'm done with comprehensive planning, I will be making my decisions almost exclusively on the comprehensive plan. If in that plan, there's a recommendation for higher development in an area that has a high transit zone or is transit rich, then that is the recommendation I will make, independent of politics, independent of what council members feel. I will be doing it based exclusively on my master plan, on this comprehensive plan. So you will know before anyone what I'm going to be doing because the comprehensive plan would be speaking that. I'm going to be expending significant political capital doing this. So I want you all to give me your thoughts, your what you think of the plan, what you think we're at, where we are. If you're not 100% sure as to what we're doing still, please ask questions because we want to try our best to answer them for you today. But thank you again for giving us this opportunity. And I want to thank John again for his presentation. So thank you, and we're opening it up to questions.
Thank you, Borough President.
So I have a couple of questions.
Sounds good.
Right. So one, when we look at I agree. First of all, I agree with all the stuff that Blanche in terms of affordable housing. However, I have a couple of concerns for CD 17, right? I also have my land use chair who's also at the meeting as well. So if he had any questions, he could ask. One, when we look at the health concerns and we look at the high impact of COVID, we also know that within some of these same areas are those areas that did not take the COVID vaccine when you look at the impact, right? So these communities are among the largest ones, especially Black and Brown communities that have refused to take the vaccine when you look at health. What are some of the plans that we would put in place to hopefully increase the message around the importance of the vaccine that also affected, because I know personally a lot of people who were affected by the COVID vaccine mandate because they said, I'm not taking it, and therefore they were impacted by poverty. That's one question. The
Can we actually,
second,
Roger, I want to answer them in order just so, so it's easier to move through it, Roger, and you get to ask more questions there shortly after. So the first thing is that we're talking mostly about physical and built environments and their effects to health outcomes versus personal choice, right? So it's a two different things. And one we can control versus another we can't. We could communicate and do whatever we can to do related to personal choice as to whether someone or not will take the vaccine. But what we can control are the physical spaces and the physical environment that exist in our city that contributes to health outcomes. So we're in this presentation, we're focused more on the physical spaces that we live in that leads to certain health outcomes that we actually have control over versus ones that are more personal choice related. And I would just give one example of that just quickly. A physical built environment is if you have no maternal health ward in your district. So you have to go further, or you have no midwives in your district, or your hospitals are terrible. You're going to have a higher mortality rate for Black women. We can fix that. That's a physical environment. That's not a personal choice. No one's choosing that. So I just want you to be mindful that physical built environments versus personal choice and what we think we can affect.
And Borough President, if I may, just one other issue. I think we also are going to, NIAM is working with us to track where COVID vaccines have been utilized across the borough. And so we have that data information. We hope to share it in a comprehensive way, and that there's opportunities for, that the borough president may not be the main actor in this, but there may be other actors, agencies, nonprofits, community groups, religious organizations that may take this information and find that their mission may be, that they can use the data to help, target their mission accordingly. So, if there may not be necessarily a one-to-one connection, we hope to have some data included that helps tell the story or the message that you've kind of just outlined.
perfect. Can I go to the second question? So the second one has to do with the average median income, right? We all know that the average median income that they look at is across so many counties that make the average median income for many residents not really truly affordable for a lot of these resources that might come in, right? So the people who have access to it are not really the people necessarily, might not necessarily be people in your community because the AMI is not there. Whereas there are people in the community who do need assistance with affordable housing. But again, the big question becomes affordable to whom? Would the borough president be able to maybe offer, I don't know, grants? I'm a former assistant principal, so we use the term scholarships, right? But I'm talking about monies or some ways to offset what they consider to be the AMI, because physically New York is not affordable to a lot of people, right? And we know that, right? So, but what could happen? So, like within my community, Board 17, we basically have almost zero affordable housing, right? Almost zero, because it's primarily residential. We have a few buildings here and there, right? And when builders come in, they're not building to make something affordable to people. So how would the borough president, like in my community, Community Board 17, and I know some other communities have the same problem, create really and true affordable housing for people who can afford it?
Yeah.
That plan.
Yeah, and like that's also a conversation that we need to have in a large scale, and having a conversation about what real affordability is and what opportunities we have. The thing that I guess I want to focus on, Roger, is that there are neighborhoods where we're not even having a discussion about what AMIs work because no building is happening, right? There are neighborhoods where there's zero development of affordable housing, and those neighborhoods are not contributing to, again, to the greater good here in being able to get our affordable housing moving across the board. If there's affordable housing throughout our borough, It allows for people to move or stay in neighborhoods in a more meaningful way. The AMI conversation, I think, can be something we fight at a case by case level, so that we're respecting the AMIs of the local community that is being affected. Right? If it's a community that has extremely high rates of poverty, we should be looking to get to the deeper AMIs. But we won't be affecting that per se, right? That's something the local council member is going to do through their negotiations. But what we can do is say, hey, this neighborhood hasn't seen affordable housing in 30 years. We want to build housing there, and council member X, move forward with doing the best you can to make it as affordable as possible. We will do that, encourage that. But what we're saying is that council member X, you can no longer be exempt from contributing to the greater good that is affordable housing.
So I guess I hear the point about the physical component in the physical space, right?
Yeah.
But how do you get me to the point of agreeing to provide or vote up affordable housing in a community where it's not affordable? Right, so it's a two-pronged approach, and I don't think that, and again, it's something to really think about.
Roger, I don't understand. Roger, explain it. So in a community that is not affordable, how is it that you're going to get me to build affordable housing?
Okay, so I'm going to vote. You're saying you're asking us to look at the physical component, right? I need to build. We don't have any. We need to build it, right?
Sure.
But I'm also asking. I believe that they are attached, right? So in order for us to say, yes, you can build these affordable housing, we also have to know how this community will be able to have access to that affordable housing. So why am I going to agree to build something where I don't have access to it? That means that the people who are going to be affected by it are not from my community. So I do get the understanding of the physical space.
Absolutely. Roger, I'm going to do the best I can, because you're having it is two separate conversations that I see how you're attaching. The places right now, the places that have the least amount of access to affordable housing are the ones that are building all the affordable housing, right? So in your neighborhood, Roger, and I don't know exactly what community board it is, if you could remind me.
17.
One of the most affected districts in our scope. You look at the scope, your district was on every single thing was on red. It was the highest on every single one. You're obviously the most affected district, one of the most affected districts, right? I also guarantee that you were red when it meant affordable housing production. 1 second, let me just.
No, you're correct. You're correct.
Absolutely.
But the point that I'm trying to make is. What I'm trying to make is that the conversation about AMIs is a conversation that we absolutely need to have. What I'm trying to say is, if in your physical space you haven't built affordable housing, we're going to ask you to build it. That's all we're asking. And whether or not it's good for your district doesn't affect or is not a conversation that I can have as the Brooklyn Borough President. That is a conversation you're going to be able to have with your local council member. What I'm looking out for is the interest of the entire borough, which means that building in neighborhoods that have traditionally not built affordable housing is going to be good for Brooklyn as a whole. So I'm coming into this as a Brooklyn Borough President. And as Borough President, I want more affordable housing being built in this borough. And I won't be able to do that if I allow for individual requests or individual interests kind of control the narrative over development. So what I'm going to do is build a very objective, comprehensive plan that speaks very clearly to what my foundational concept is for where affordable housing should be built. And I'm going to use that independent of politics to make my recommendations on land use items that move on to the council member. So that's what I'm trying to say. So whether you think it's affordable or not is not what's going to make the determination, my determination. What's going to make my determination is if your district has the conditions by which we can build more affordable housing. Do you have a rich transit neighborhood? Do you have good education? Do you got a lot of parks? Just understanding that. It's well, this is an ideal place to build affordable housing. So we're going to move forward and make a recommendation that happens in a physical space. What happens at a local level or more local level is going to be up to the council member. But I'm not going to base my decision on the council member's wishes locally. I'm going to do it on a more borough-wide level.
And BP, just one more point on that. I think, like you said, like the data-driven piece. Hopefully, there's this. I mean, I believe that this document will have information tools to help communities like yourselves and CB17 to advocate for those kind of issues. So hopefully, it'll be an opportunity for making sure that we're all identifying the same data. We're all talking from the same sort of information pieces, so that you can see what your AMI is in for your community, and you know how to find that information, where to locate it, and making sure that people that come to you with housing construction know that that's what your community's income is, and that they're aware of that stuff, and that you guys can highlight that for them. So we hope that this is also an opportunity to connect community boards with information about the borough and be an advocate for your own community.
Mr. Borough President, is Camacho from CB4. I'm just curious in regards to the component, in regards to the health and the well-being of the community, in regards to 335 Central. We have a hub of a Department of Health and Mental in there, but it's not fully function. It's not a fully. Are you saying we're going to bring fully function stuff to 335 Central Avenue, which is not one of those Gotham things that you see, but we need it in the community, which is on Hope Garden, which is was a housing development. We're going to see more services there, or doctors there, a real component where we used to have, when I was a kid, we used to go get the shots or your COVID shots. Now it's not really. We're trying to make sure that if this is going to be a good component in regards to DOH and MH, to make sure that we have the health department there, that building that's been there closed for a while and is underutilized. So I think the borough president knows the building that we're talking about, which is our 335 Central, which is supposed to be the health department. Now we don't know. We're trying to work and find out. It's not a fully functioning health department. How is it that we can get the subsidies and the money to make sure that it can be utilized and used for its purpose as the health department that it used to be? In regards to health.
So this conversation is not only about development exclusively. We're going to be looking at other conditions that are absent within communities. So you'll be able to recognize whether or not you have a sufficient amount of health centers, whether you have a certain amount of park space. So we're going to be looking at not just outcomes based on development and housing. We're going to be looking at other things that contribute to, the poor social determinants within communities. So we will be able to highlight that, Camacho, in just being able to recognize that, let's say Bushwick, for example, is a place that has very few health centers. And because of it, we have lack of poor health outcomes. So maybe your Bushwick isn't the place where we're going to look to do housing development, but what we need to do is more health development. And that's just an example of something that could come up from this study. I also want to say we're in the beginning stages of development in this study. There's a lot of work we need to do to figure out what the ills and the concerns of our borough are and how we can address them. We're also going to talk about education, education, health, transportation, a whole bunch of things that we think are important and matter to Brooklyn and are important to know what the next 10 years are going to look like. Right now, the mayor's office, the city of New York, has no plan as to what you guys are going to see in 10 years in your neighborhoods. There's no plan. Oh, well, at least they won't release it. There's no released public plan. What I'm saying is that I'm going to give you a plan. I'm going to be very clear with you as to what we want to do in your communities and what we want to present to the mayor's office in your communities that we think would be helpful to satisfying these health outcomes and the growth of the borough of Brooklyn. So we will be mentioning that, Camacho. You'll be seeing that in the report.